as well. The crowdfunding website set up by the state made something like $450,000 in just about a week. I am joined now by somebody else who I understand will be at the border with former President Trump today. That is Chad Wolf, the former acting Secretary of Homeland Security in the Trump administration. Secretary Wolf, good morning and thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Hallie.
Lot to get into, a lot on the border, a lot on other topics, but I would be remiss if I did not start with the news that has broken here in the last 20 minutes, and that is the potential for the former president's business, for the Trump organization, to be charged, we expect, tomorrow by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Your reaction?
Well, Hallie, I don't know anything about that. Haven't been following that case, focused on Homeland Security issues. So I'm watching the reporting on your show, as many of your viewers were as well.
As you talk about your capacities, you're working on Homeland Security issues. You are not today at the border appearing in any kind of official capacity, obviously. Neither is the former president. So what is it that you're hoping to accomplish down there other than the optics, right, of talking about a potential campaign issue that I know Republicans are hoping to capitalize on?
Well, I think for me, and I can't speak for former President Trump or others, but I think this is about drawing attention to what's going on the border, the impact it's having on border communities and Americans across the board. And so whether it's illegal narcotics coming across that border, or it's the human trafficking that we see in record numbers, I think it's important to continue to talk about this, to continue to try to find solutions to the crisis that we see there today.
We talked about Governor Abbott's border wall just a moment ago. There are critics who say this is a misuse of funds, probably not even constitutional, given that immigration enforcement is a federal issue. That is a point, Mr. Secretary, that you yourself made publicly when you were in the administration, that it is not up to local authorities to enforce immigration laws. That is DHS's job. So how is what Governor Abbott is doing okay, in your view?
Well, I think the issue here is that the federal government is not actually enforcing immigration law along that border. So you have states that are very.
Obviously, wait a second, Mr. Secretary. The administration would obviously say something very different. The issue is that Governor Abbott would like to, as he has said, fulfill the former president's pledge to build a wall just in Texas alone. I'm specifically asking about the constitutionality questions here. Immigration enforcement, you have acknowledged, is a DHS thing. Governor Abbott is obviously not the DHS secretary.
Right. But there are things that Governor Abbott can do as governor of the state of Texas to protect communities, to protect his citizens, including border infrastructure on different lands in the state of Texas, as well as making sure that he's holding those that have no legal right to be here. He can certainly hold those individuals. What the state of Texas likely can't do, that other states likely cannot do, is actually deport individuals. That is a federal government responsibility. That's when we talk about enforcing immigration law.
Got it. Can you explain, Mr. Secretary, and I really wonder this, how is it that you are going down there to the border with Donald Trump today? You're willing to stand next to somebody from whom his administration you resigned, who has repeatedly undermined a key part of our democracy by lying about an election, which you yourself have called the most secure election in U.S. history?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, the invitation from Governor Abbott, I was happy to accept that invitation. And two, this is about border security. And I've been talking a lot about that. I talked a lot about that while I was in office. And I think President Trump was very sincere over the 4 years in trying to bring some rationality back to border security and immigration enforcement. I think we accomplished that in 2019 and 2020. And unfortunately, we've seen that undone in a matter of weeks earlier this year. And I think that's important to have that debate. And so I think that's what this trip is about. And that's what we've been talking about over the last several months, is how do we bring border security back to the border?
I would be remiss not to note that, in fact, that surge at the border started even while former President Trump was in office. But separately, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here, Secretary Wolf. Then it is in your view, then, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to read between the lines. First, you said you were invited by Governor Abbott, not by Donald Trump, which to me is an indication you are looking to perhaps distance yourself from him. And it sounds like what you're saying is that you believe immigration is more important than the lies that Donald Trump has been spreading about the election, which is why you are appearing with him today. Do I have that right or no?
No, you don't have that right. So I'm very proud of my service in the Trump administration over 4 years and as acting secretary and what we did to secure the homeland. And part of that is the border security and the immigration enforcement we did, and it worked. And we have results that showed that it worked. You talk about the surge that started back in 2020. I wouldn't say that it was a surge because there were immigration consequences for those crossing the border illegally. What we have today is those that cross the border illegally, there is no consequence. It's back to catch and release. That's what I've been talking about over the last 4 months since leaving office. That's why I'm here on the border.
Right. That's not actually sort of, I think, the case at hand. But I just want to get, and I promise I'm going to move on, but I just want to get to the specific reason of what, because I remember, Secretary, I covered the Trump administration. I remembered when you resigned after January 6th. I was there for those moments. And I just wonder, how is it that you are comfortable standing alongside Donald Trump after you came out and put yourself on the line and said this was the most secure election in U.S. history and stated the truth and stated the facts about the election, something that Donald Trump has not. I just want to specifically get to that point because I'm trying to understand how you're doing this today.
Look, Hallie, I appreciate that you want to talk about personalities. I'm here to talk about an issue that
democracy, right?
Just don't want to cover, and that's the crisis on the border. So I'm happy to talk about that, happy to talk about policies that do work and that don't work, and that's why I'm here today on the border to talk about border security.
I feel like I've given you an opportunity to answer. You clearly, that is not an area that you want to go to. I will note that we are obviously talking about immigration. We are obviously talking about democracy here as well. And on that point, I have to ask you about other news of the day, which is the House voting today to create that January 6th Select Committee. You know that vote's happening, I think. I want to, if asked, will you appear before the committee if they'd like you to? Is that something you do?
Sure. I haven't been asked, haven't been approached by anyone. Happy to talk about the events of January the 6th and everything that the department, at least when I was there, was involved in leading up to that, and how we shared intelligence and how we prepared for DHS to protect DHS facilities in D.C.
You talk about the DHS preparation on that front. That bipartisan Joint Senate Committee, report, I should say, talked about, a number of failures leading up to that day. One of them, and I want to quote that, quote, neither the FBI nor DHS issued a threat assessment or intelligence bulletin warning law enforcement entities of the potential for violence. That is a quote from that joint report. It obviously doesn't put all the blame on DHS, of course, but you did lead the agency at the time. Do you feel like you are able to accept some responsibility for what was described as a breakdown there ahead of the 6th?
I think it's important to remember that the information sharing that we did inside the District of Columbia, which there's a number of law enforcement agencies, to include Capitol Police, all of that information was shared. They had the same intelligence that DHS did, that DOD did, that FBI did, that others did, in my view, from what I saw and what I was showed. And so we shared that information with the relevant partners there that needed to take action. Now, I think there's been a lot talked about on what Capitol Police did not or did do. And so I think that's obviously separate. But yes, obviously, you can always do things better. But again, I think that we shared information that we had at the time that we received. Obviously, we received from the FBI, and we're sharing that with others as we could.
In hindsight, Secretary Wolf, do you wish that you had done anything differently, had been more aggressive, given what we saw with that insurrection on the 6th, as far as the intelligence sharing you had, knowing that we are now, doing some Monday morning quarterbacking here?
Again, I think it's important to keep in mind jurisdictions, and it's important to keep in mind what the Department of Homeland Security could and couldn't do. And so we were able to protect federal facilities in D.C., which we did, which we had a number of personnel there. But the Capitol Police, DOD, and the Pentagon obviously have different and unique authorities on how they do that with the National Guard. So again, we were sharing information. We were on phone calls leading up to the 6th, and I think the department did a fairly good job in making sure that the information that we had, that others in the District of Columbia had as well.
Former acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf. Secretary Wolf, thank you for